Welcome to the Real Chili Podcast.
And the Golden Eagles of Marquette University in Milwaukee are bound for the Final Four for only the third time ever.
5 seconds left. Marquette down by one, trying to avoid the upset. Blue the drive, the left hand. It's good. 1 second to play. Vander Blue has put Marquette in front by one.
And I want to win every day as basketball players, as students, and I want to win every day, most importantly, as people.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Real Chili Podcast. I'm your host, Mike Lavender. I'm here at an undisclosed location somewhere in Milwaukee with Brian Henry, Pete Mohan, and Pete Wirth.
Does it have to be undisclosed? We can probably disclose.
I think there's some debauchery that happened last night. And
All right,
that'll
that's fair.
happen tonight. I don't think we need to disclose location.
Okay.
Yeah.
But we're in town.
We're in town. We're here in Milwaukee.
Outside of O'Donnell.
on the street
God,
outside
I
of
hope
O'Donnell. This is my first time back in town after almost a decade. You fellas get up here more frequently. But we're taking in the Villanova game. We're recording this on Saturday, January 27th.
But more importantly, we have a special guest.
And we wanted to use this opportunity to get a pulse on the student perspective of Marquette basketball. Things have changed since we were here. So we have Andrew Goldstein.
Not Steen.
Yeah, not Steen.
Not
a lot
Steen.
of people make the Steen mistake.
For all the Steen people out there, cut that shit out. All right?
Exactly, it's Stein. Thank you so much. I
There you
appreciate
go.
it.
There you
On
go.
the record.
So Andrew, you're with the Marquette Wire.
Yeah.
And you were saying earlier you're really honing in on TV, but what do you do for Marquette Wire? Kind of what's your beat? What do you cover?
So basically, anything that goes on in the sports department, I have at least a little bit of a hand in it. So I mainly do feature stories for print. I do TV packages. I do radio and TV play-by-play, both for Marquette Radio and for Marquette Athletics. I have a hand in designing and posting our Snapchat preview stories, which just debuted this year. Oh, cool. So basically, everything that goes on in the sports department, I'm involved in it to some extent. And then I have the greatest staff in student media to help deal with all of the other 90% of things that I can't get to.
So the reason that we initially reached out is that you had posted just a few days ago an article commemorating the 1-year anniversary of when Marquette had a miraculous upset of Villanova. And so the piece is really interesting in that you get the perspectives of how many, 10 different people?
Yeah,
7
5
different
or 6 different people that missed it, but I had like a dozen people that reached out to me.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, if we include all dozen, we're going to have to publish a book. Let's just cut it off after a certain point. But yeah, it's a perspective of people that missed the Villanova upset.
And
I was actually one of them.
And it was everything from alums to current students. It was kind of all different walks
Yeah.
of the Marquette community, right? Yeah.
Yes.
What were some of the common themes that you heard from people in the regret for missing the game, or were there recurring themes from person to person, or was it different from person to person?
It was kind of different from person to person. So when I put out this call on Twitter, this was like 5 or 6 days before we went to print with our first edition of the paper for the year. And I'm like, oh, this will be like a nice, fun little story. You know, this is an angle that some people probably didn't think of. So it'll be a nice way to kind of differentiate ourselves from everyone else. So I put it out there. I expected to get like 3 or 4 people. That might be enough for like a 600, 700 word story. I had people reaching out to me through Twitter DMs, LinkedIn, email, like at least a dozen different people with, I was studying abroad, I was rushing that night and couldn't make it. I had a late night engineering class. Yep. We had one woman that I included in the story that got food poisoning, bad hummus.
Tough break.
Yeah.
It happens.
No, of all the hummuses you could have brought,
Yeah,
you had
exactly.
the one that made you miss the Villanova game.
Another one bites the hummus.
Yeah, there you go.
Couple on that one.
Yeah, a couple people that were on business trips. I myself was sitting on a couch back in New Jersey because I was studying abroad last spring semester. I was in Melbourne, Australia, and their semesters don't start until late February, so I didn't have to leave until early February. So I'm sitting there on my couch, you know, Villanova goes up by 17. I'm like, well, at least I didn't miss anything. Then throughout the whole comeback, I'm like...
And then Kate and Reinhardt.
Yeah, then Kate and Reinhardt. who is now in Bosnia. By the way, can I diverge for just a second?
We make a living diverging.
Yes. I'm really disappointed that Caden Reinhardt doesn't get to play the Ball brothers in Lithuania. Because had he not been traded from his Lithuanian team, that was on the schedule for March 18th or 19th.
Oh, that would have been special.
Facebook would have streamed it. It would have been awesome.
And he would have shown I can take more worse shots than the Ball brothers.
Out of all the members of the roster last year, Caden Reinhardt by far would be most likely to buy some big baller brand shoes.
Oh, for sure.
Yes.
Yeah. Probably. Yeah. I would bet he has a pair.
The wet, right?
The wet.
The wet.
Yeah. The $32,000 wets.
That's an investment.
Money well spent.
Yeah.
Sure, you have to take care of your kids' futures with the Wets.
Exactly.
But no, that was the one game where Caden Reinhardt's running and gunning actually worked out. Mm-hmm. And every time Caden took a shot, I'm like, oh no. And for that game, it just worked.
And it was the only way they were going to win because Villanova's, while who didn't play perfect in that game, still played great defense, and he had to throw in just some.
They were kind of.
He was shut well, but we saw it all year. He had the guts and the confidence to take pull-up contested threes, falling to his right, and throw them in, not with regularity, but throw them in, feel confident enough to shoot it. Yeah. And he did that game, and it was amazing.
Yeah, well, people forget this now, and I'm actually posting a column about this. Well, by the time this podcast is out, it might be up already, about how Villanova beat themselves in the last 6 or 7 minutes.
Oh, absolutely.
People forget that they missed 8 threes and took at least half of those threes with 15 seconds still left on the shot clock.
Right.
And for one of the consistently smartest teams in the country, it was a very uncharacteristic thing of them to do.
This may be a hot take, so...
Bring the hotness.
So in addition to...
It is 50 degrees
Get
outside.
the oven.
It's hot in here. We got the sun coming through the windows. Yeah. In addition to your article commemorating the 1-year anniversary, you saw the Marquette University official Twitter account. They were throwing a bunch of things out there about... I think they pushed out your article. They might have pushed out other things.
I was actually on their podcast.
Oh, really?
Last week. It got published this week.
Oh, man.
So
sloppy seconds.
I know. I need one more to pull the hat trick. So if there are any other Marquette podcasts out there, I'm available.
I'm sure Bill Simmons will have you on.
Yeah.
Oh, God.
I'm sure he'd love to talk about it.
My take is I saw all that, and it bothered me to the extent that it was a big win over the number 1 team. But a year later, we're still holding that up as a program as like this amazing fucking thing that we did. Great win, big win for the program. But this is Marquette basketball. We should not still be celebrating and holding up a victory at home over a number 1 team a year later. So this isn't about your article.
Sure.
It's more about the
state of things.
The state of things. And
Mike's blaming you for this entire thing.
Right.
Damn it, Andrew.
And so that bothers me. And I understand maybe that's where we are right now, but that it bothers me.
I think it would have even more value if it was in the Big East tournament or something like that. This is middle of the regular season win.
Sure.
It really, in the scheme of things, that had little value other than boosting our resume to get us into the tournament.
I want to hear what Andrew has to say, but I think I'd come out probably more on your side. I agree with you, but at the same time, they don't get in the tournament without that win.
Right.
That victory is what pushed them over the goal line to get in with a 19-win season.
Which is huge for Wojo. I mean, to get that win was the springboard to him having his first NCAA appearance.
Anytime you beat a number 1 seed, it's obviously a big deal.
Right.
But, we were...
We only lost 3 games last year, right?
Four of us, 4
3
regular hosts who used to the old Big East conference when you're playing... top 10 teams almost on a weekly basis. We're coming from a little different perspective.
Correct. Yeah. Well, and I think partially the point that Mike's getting at is even though time marches on, right? But there's still if you're going to just look at the last decade or 12 years of Marquette, it's been a pretty successful run as a whole for the program. Yeah. If you want to start with Wade's Final Four, I think you can probably put that in its own box because that was such a wacky anomaly to get a player of that caliber that came through then. It was much, the run after that started with McNeil, Matthews, and James and making the tournament 8 years in a row, which ended in a team that got to the Final Four, got to the Elite Eight to play a team we had already beaten and had a shot to go to the Final Four. And
couldn't beat Michael Carter Williams.
No, they could not. But they took a dip after that. And I think that dip is kind of what's caused it put us in the rut that we're in. It happens. You can't dip for
But are
three.
we still in the rut?
Well,
That's a fair.
see,
That's a fair
Andrew,
question for Andrew.
It doesn't bother me that people are still talking about it because it was such a special moment compared to
Agreed.
everything else that had happened.
Right.
I think it was more than a win. It was a turning point. Not necessarily in the respect that, okay, Marquette's back in the national title conversation, but, Marquette's relevant
That's
again.
a good way to
They're a
look at it.
fun team to watch, and they're worth
Agreed.
going to again.
So it was
I think
They were in
exactly.
bad need. They were in bad need of a
Yes.
big win at home, and that would have been a big win if it was against Xavier. They had beaten Xavier, but whomever.
I think if we're still sitting around talking about it in 2 years or 3 years, then that's worrying because it's like, then you're the last guy at the high school bar, like, sitting around at the parking lot or something. Yeah. But I think
we've all been there.
Yeah.
There
Speak
last
for
night.
yourself.
Yeah. No, but I think if it's within a year, a little more than a year, and you still have much of that same team back, I don't think it's concerning that people are still holding that up as the moment, especially when this team only has one senior, the majority of it's underclassmen. Wojo hasn't really had a team that was expected to be great so far, even though people have been pretty set.
Interrupting our guests for alcohol.
We're trained professionals here on the Real Chili podcast.
Well, I mean, you're a senior, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, as a senior, really, like, what else do you have to cling to in your history? I mean,
Yeah, right. So
if you're an upperclassman at Marquette, what else really is there to hang your hat on in terms of your basketball
so the
career?
Villanova game for you, easily thus far,
Biggest moment.
Yeah.
biggest moment. Could you name a number two biggest
The
moment
number two for me,
during your time?
which
at Marquette?
honestly,
Is
it
Villanova
might be
number one?
this other moment might be number one just because of the fact that I was there to witness it and I wasn't there for Villanova.
Yeah.
The first time I ever covered Marquette basketball in press row, it was in the Barclays Center in New York, Legends Classic,
I was there
2000,
the Ben Simmons game.
2015, Henry Ellenson against Ben Simmons.
Yeah,
right.
That Ben Simmons performance is, I think, the best individual performance
20 and
that
20,
I've
right?
ever seen.
So
yeah.
your maybe
We all know
number-
Henry's a better pro, though.
My maybe number one is
A regular
Henry
season.
Ellenson versus Ben Simmons, just because it has kind of sentimental significance for me because it's the first game I ever covered.
And it's
But
cool to
I-
go to neutral
yeah.
site games.
Yeah, neutral
Watch
site
Marquette.
game. I was like a professional on my own, etc. But in terms of like objective, the most significant moment that happened when I was here, not from a personal standpoint, but from a program standpoint, then yes, undoubtedly it was Villanova.
Well,
Yeah,
then
and he was certain. He was like right at the beginning of that year. He was like guaranteed number one pick overall too. Ben Simmons.
Yeah.
So like that's
That was a cool game. But in addition to that, since you weren't at the Villanova game, and then your other game was at the Barclays Center, what was your favorite home basketball memory? A game that you attended? Or, I mean, you can take time to think about it. But pause.
that's just the window open.
Okay. For a second, I'm
Because
like, is
my-
part of the Real Chili Pod experience fighting off intruders?
Yeah, I was just saying.
Well, it is masking the scent of what I just did in the bathroom. But I'll open up that.
We can edit that out.
Keep it.
But yeah,
Keep it.
so
Favorite
what was your
home
best-
memory?
Right.
Honestly, I'm trying to think of one, and I haven't been there for too many of them because
I think that kind of answers it.
my freshman and sophomore year, I was in the crowd for just about every game because the upperclassmen were covering men's basketball, and not a whole lot of great things happen at home. Freshman and sophomore year. Junior year, I was abroad for most of the enjoyable late season run.
Yeah.
Right.
Like they beat. I don't even know because they didn't beat any of their good non-conference opponents at home last year when I was here. Like Fresno State was the best team I got to see them beat in person. And then like for this year's Wisconsin game, that was in the Kohl Center.
Right.
So honestly, the Seton Hall game from a couple weeks ago may be the best one I have ever witnessed at home.
That's a sad state of affairs.
It was a good game.
Although honestly,
Great game.
you know, part of it was going abroad at the time when a lot of the best home moments over my 4 years happened. So part of it was bad timing.
So we have a general theory that the rut that we've been in, not necessarily this year or the previous year, but in the first couple of years of the Wojo era, that is the primary contributor to the lack of consistent fan attendance. And I think a consistent theme from Wojo over the past at least year and a half has been calling out the lack of student not just fan, but particularly student participation. And you have a unique perch from which to interact with Wojo or see him, kind of make these asks. How do you read into that? Because to me, it's kind of like, okay, Wojo, I get you want students to be there, but just fucking win, and they'll show up, and you need to do that consistently.
So I have a couple different thoughts on this. Yeah. Number one, I always notice that Wojo compliments the good crowds when they show up. Like, for Seton Hall, very good crowd for a winter break game. Marquette wins by 20. First thing he does, fans were great. So that's very much in his head, I think. And
Pavlovian Wojo.
Yes, Pavlovian Wojo. I think part of it is the team hasn't been doing so well recently, although that's beginning to change. But I think part of it is you're dealing with a different body of students. So around the mid-2000s or late 2000s when you all were here, it was mostly students from the Wisconsin area, from the Chicago suburbs, people whose parents went to Marquette, that grew up watching Marquette basketball on TV, whose friends went to Marquette. They were kind of inaugurated into the Marquette tradition and watching Marquette basketball early on. I came from New Jersey. Like, if I didn't love college basketball so much, I wouldn't have really had an incentive to care about Marquette. I didn't know anybody who went there. My parents have never heard of the place. Right. And now that they're starting to recruit more from California, from the East Coast, lacrosse has actually been a big driver for just general East Coast admissions. You're dealing with a whole bunch of students that were never inaugurated into the Marquette tradition, or Marquette basketball was never a big deal for them.
Is there data to back that up?
See, this is all my speculation, honestly. I do know they've been increasing.
I got great news. We live for speculation here.
Yeah, I do know that they've been increasing their offers and their seeking of students from the East Coast and the West Coast. I don't know for how much specifically. Yep. I've just heard a lot of buzz about that around admissions. Yep. But, I could be completely off base. This is all anecdotal from just talking to friends and talking to people around. I'm sure someone could look at the data and be like, well, actually, this is wrong. But this is just what I've experienced in my 3.5 years here. So keep in mind that when you're listening to me say this, you are getting a filter of my friends and my experience. Right. Maybe I'm just not running in the right circles or in the right position to see the full picture.
The picture that you see, though, is still the picture that you see.
Yeah.
Right. So it doesn't necessarily make it wrong. It's what is happening in front of you. That for me to say, to point out the original era that we were there to where it is now.
Exactly.
It's a very simple thing. We won a lot more.
Yeah, and I have no context for that. I wasn't really paying attention to Marquette basketball.
But I can just say from 2005 to 2013, at the end of that Elite Eight run, they won a lot of games and were ranked in the top 20. Pretty much, they didn't fall out of the rankings very often.
And we were frequently on TV competing with other teams
on ESPN.
And had a run sending guys to the NBA.
Right.
Granted, they were all a lot of them were sleepers that went on to it, but a lot of guys got drafted, and a lot of guys, they had a lot of recognizable players that were easy to get behind and play. And
the reputation for guys that didn't get drafted that ended up on rosters.
Yes.
Toughness.
Right. Yeah. But and what also helped is the schedule. Having Syracuse come in on a Wednesday night in February when it's snowing. Don't get me wrong, it's snowing out and it's cold, but Syracuse is number 5 in the country and everybody was excited.
Yeah.
That helped as opposed to Wednesday against Providence. It's not saying Providence, they're a traditional Big East school, but they just don't have the same sizzle.
Well, then you had UConn, then you had Louisville, then you had West Virginia,
and even
Pitt
at that time was very good.
But a lot of those programs have dropped off. So even if the Big East had stayed the way it was,
it's a completely different era. But I think it ultimately,
I think this Big East is a much better conference than that Big East would have been at this time.
But the biggest thing, wins and losses fix a lot of everything. Yeah. I'm fixated on that little number next to your name. It's bullshit. Like rankings really are. It's a popularity contest, but average fans see numbers next to names and they get excited.
Exactly.
And that's, when they see 19 Marquette against number 1 Villanova, there's just even a bigger charge to it. It's kind of an irrelevant hype.
But in lieu of that, there's other things that, other ways that you can get yourself out there. Like, for example, Marcus Howard, 52 points.
Right.
Yeah. And he was on SportsCenter and, things like that, highlights, and his name is going across the ticker on the bottom of the screen on all the sports channels. It's not a ranking, but still that's positive pub that was created by a player, and that's beneficial to this program elevating.
Yeah.
Well, I think one of the other things to keep in mind is the price of tickets.
Yeah.
So it's $100 for student season tickets now, which isn't bad considering there's 16 or 17 home games. But I would hazard to guess they're going to go up once the new stadium goes up. Yeah. And what I've noticed a lot of people doing is saying, all right, I'm not going to buy season tickets, and if I want to go to a game, I'll just post in student ticket exchange, hey, I'm looking to buy a ticket for this game. So, you may not get tickets to every game that you want to go to, but you'll get most of them.
I find it remarkable. Before I started my job after college, I worked in sales in the athletic department that summer and helped sell tickets. And looking back at it now, it does seem pretty unbelievable. Mark, coming out of our senior year, which was 2008-09, Marquette was sold out the previous year of student tickets. Sold 4,300 student tickets that year, full seasons. And you think about that, like, oh yeah, of course. Like, there's only there's only 9,000 undergrad at the school, and to sell 4,300 student, every game that are, 40. That's a huge student section. Yeah, when you think about what's set aside at most universities, 4,300 seats.
Yeah, I've always thought that the Bradley Center was too big for Marquette. I think the new stadium is going to be too big for Marquette.
But when they're rolling, though,
when they're rolling, it's a great place.
We've seen them fill it, and it's not just it's great, but like people should. There is fan support for this team at a big level, but they need to be successful.
So, looking back through the AP rankings, Marquette hasn't been ranked in the AP polls since the 2013-2014 season when we were pre-ranked coming into the season at 17.
God, was that a reach?
There's...
Are you going to edit that out? Or?
Welcome
back to Milwaukee, folks.
Got people screaming outside. So, we haven't been ranked since the 2013-2014 season, and getting into how do we, aside from winning big games, how do we get ranked? When you look at the past few games, so we're recording this on the 27th of January, but you look at the past few games, win at Providence, lost to Villanova, win against Seton Hall, lost to Butler, win against DePaul, lost to Xavier. Some of that is the Big East is tough.
Wojo actually hasn't had a 3-game conference winning streak yet.
Wow.
Really?
Yeah.
So
it hasn't happened.
It's this consistency. You get a good win.
Take that knowledge drop there. Don't get hurt.
No time like the present for or at the end of the Big East season when we get Georgetown and DePaul and St. John's.
And if you want to build fan support, you get a big win against Seton Hall, and then fans are interested in the Butler games coming up, and then you shit the bed against Butler.
Yeah.
Right?
I'm going to go microcosm here.
Oh, please do.
Marquette basketball in the game within the game.
Oh boy.
You score a 3-pointer, and then you allow a 3-pointer on the other end. I mean, that's just Marquette basketball right now is, we put up points, but then we don't get the stops. And it's the same thing with the record is get a big win and then a letdown. And it's like we can't get the stops on the schedule that we need in order to really push our resume forward.
And we're a young team, and
we are young.
If this is still happening next season, then I think it's time to work.
And that's a good bridge
next year.
That's a good bridge too. I don't think any of us here aren't optimistic that I think the future is very bright. I mean, it's terrible to sit there and say because I think they're going to be really damn good next year.
Yeah,
and it's terrible to already be looking ahead to that.
Your turn, Marcus and Sam. You get Ed Morrow back off the red shirt here. Joey Hauser, Brendan Bailey.
They're going to get bigger, stronger, more athletic.
I feel like people always forget about Brendan Bailey.
Yeah,
I do too. I think that he's going to,
except for the people whose houses and doors that he's knocking on.
Yes,
there you go. On the last couple of years.
Join the party.
So we quickly segued into being good for next year. I think the talent will certainly be the highest it's ever been in the Wojo era. Yeah. Next year, I think the defense is still a question. The consistent lack of...
They have 2 5'10" guards, Mike. What are you going to do? It's not. I don't think it's the structural...
When you're talking about
this is what happens, Andrew. We start fighting.
Sure. It's entertaining.
When you talk about defense and you're talking about back-end rotations and leaving guys wide open... You can't always blame that on the 5'10" guards letting people beat them off the dribble.
It's not just beating off the dribble. They can't cover as much space with their arms. It's just that simple.
Even if their arms were outreached all the time, they are in such bad positions so frequently that doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Mike and Brian have a really entertaining wingspan contest right now.
What? You think it's a coaching issue or an inability to communicate by the bigs? I mean, obviously, Theo John, it's his first year at Marquette, and really, Froling, this is really his not even a full first year. He didn't really even play that much at SMU. So these are guys that are still learning how to play within the scheme, certainly, and defense is like that. You gotta get used to the guys that you're playing next to. It's a feel thing, and communication is part of that. And it's really hard for someone to just be a 6'11" big man thrown into the Big East Conference and expected to understand everything about defensive rotations.
And especially who's not a natural rim protector.
Right,
They completely lack that.
Exactly. Guys like Theo John, Harry Froling, and Matt Held, as hard as I know they're playing and as hard as people around the program think that they play, they're not athletically cut out to be 30 minutes per game against Amari Spellman.
Yeah.
Like, the ideal role for Helt right now, or Theo John right now, is 10, 12 minutes off the bench when the starting big guy needs a breather, and, they're being asked to chip in 25, 30. So I think if you saw them in their ideal roles, your opinion of them would probably get better because they'd be asked to do the proper amount instead of the increased workload they have to do now.
If you can ask out of those three guys to get 15 points, 15 rebounds, and 2 or 3 blocks a game, that three-headed...
Collectively?
Three-headed... combined.
I was
Not
say,
not each.
You hesitated to call it a monster.
It's not a monster. It's not a three-headed monster. It's
No, we have the golden
organism.
No, Howard, Rousey, and Hauser, they're the Golden Threegles. We put that on the headline of an issue of the Tribune. I think my exec editor wanted to kill me. We reached the pun portion of the podcast.
I had a question that kind of goes back to what we were talking about a little bit ago. When we watch the game, we just watch the games on TV. The most of them.
Do we?
The four of us.
You don't fly in for every game?
What a loser! I went to the Kohl Center.
Oh, okay.
I'm a good fan.
I did too. That was very fun.
My character. It was very fun.
Yeah.
But seeing it from just on TV and not being there and not being around the team every day, we just noticed the lack of empty seats.
Yeah.
So, is there an actual general apathy towards the basketball program from the students?
It's not just students; it's other fans too.
And other fans. And if there is, what of the reasons that we've talked about, like already here, do you think is the biggest one?
Well, I think the winning is the biggest issue because you're going to have a certain subset of casual fans where you're not going to get them to go to any more than Wisconsin, National Marquette Day, and maybe 1 or 2 others unless they're a top 25 team.
Right. And that's at any school.
Yeah. No, if you offer
the
people...
exception of about 6 or 7.
Right.
Exactly. Yeah. Like, Kentucky or Duke will almost never have problems drawing a crowd, but at a lot of other schools, you have to be actively very good in order to get all of those casual fans to show up in the student section. Like, I don't have any data on this, but I'm sure if you went back to Villanova in the couple of years where they were a 500 team before they got really good, I would imagine that the atmosphere on campus was roughly that. Mm-hmm. So I think... Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to say, when I went to Clemson for grad school, I went to a few of their basketball games. And there was a couple years when Clemson had won a bunch of games in the non-conference. And
is that a KJ McDaniels year?
Oh, KJ McDaniels.
I think it may be even pre-KJ McDaniels, but yeah.
Wow. And his mom. His mom was a big deal.
But yeah, they're at a school that so celebrates its football and its baseball teams. Even when the Clemson basketball team was winning, it was a paltry crowd, both normal, alumni fans and students. And it's, I don't know, you really have to build that fan equity over a long time.
Because Oliver Cornell would get to the tournament every 5 years as a 10 seed and then lose in the first round.
I saw him once he was about to head on his boat. He was in his skivvies at the beer. He was getting a 12er at the beer store, heading out to the lake.
And I'll give this line. This can be my, hashtag hot take of the day.
Oh.
I've said this since I was in school, even when we were going well. Other people have heard me. I'm sure I've said it to one of you guys, but I've always said that and it's not to be a slight, but because of our present situation, it's just a good reminder. We're closer to being DePaul than we are Kentucky. And this is a very good program with great history. Jeez. But if you struggle for long stretches of time, people will.
I don't think this is that long of a stretch. Marquette struggled for much longer. We were talking about the 1990s before this started.
Agreed, 100%. And I don't think it's that bad. But I'm just saying it's a good reminder of if you struggled for 4 or 5 years, you would lose people.
Sure, but also
it would take a lot to bring them back.
We're talking a lot about the people that show up in the seats. That's kind of more of a sign of prestige than a way schools actually make money nowadays.
It's also part of 2018. TV viewing experience is great. Why spend the money to drive down?
Exactly. Yeah. Well, honestly, I don't think the FS1 thing is really that bad because when you're on ESPN, you're on ESPN, but you're also competing with God knows how many other big basketball schools. Like if Duke, North Carolina's on, you're getting bumped off no matter how good your game is.
Not to mention other programming. I mean, Big East is like the programming for FS1.
On FS1, everything is on Big East, and one of the priorities of the athletic department isn't just to show off men's basketball, it's to show off everything else. So I think women's basketball, men's lacrosse, all of the other I want to say non-revenue generating because some of the bigger ones do
Marquette
generate.
Women's volleyball championship.
I was sideline reporting for that game.
Were you?
Yeah. So volleyball was my thing for 4 years. I love volleyball.
That Big East women's championship last year I watched.
Right.
Oh, yeah. With Danny King and the half-court shot. Yeah, the women's programs had a lot of buzz around it for the last year or two. I think at that game there was... Well, the Al McGuire Center was pretty well full. They had over 3,000 fans there. And now they're having the women's basketball tournament in Wintrust. And I think they're trying to make that as much a part of the regular conference tournament rotation as Madison Square Garden is for men. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I kind of like what they're doing.
To kind of wrap it up, and we're recording this the day before the Villanova game, so we can kind of speculate about it. But if Marquette were to win against Villanova and make it back-to-back wins against them, in consecutive years at home,
when they're ranked
number one, in fact, yes. How do you think that adds to what we're saying, this fan equity or whatever? Do you think that goes a long way with this fan base in that they can trust the program to put big wins together in situations like these?
Yeah, I think that would go a long way because you have another reminder that the program is going somewhere. Mm-hmm. Because to make an analogy here, I guess not even an analogy, it's just an example. When you walk into the Al McGuire Center, like when I walked in freshman, sophomore year to interview people, the big mural that they would have to greet people was clearly from like 2004, 2005. To have a yearly...
Jason Maxiel is standing in the center of the key for Cincinnati.
Literally, it was Marquette Cincinnati.
Yeah, I think it was from the 03. It's that photo is from the game. They clinched the Conference USA Championship regular season title.
Yeah, if you don't have to go back a couple years to remind people of how great the program's history was, I think from a practical standpoint, beating Villanova almost assures that you're in the tournament this year, provided you just... kind of go 500 and stay the course the rest of the way.
Right.
But from a fan engagement standpoint, it reminds people when we talk about Marquette basketball, we're not just talking about a program that used to be good or has history. We're talking about something that's still happening and that still has a future and is going places. Right. So I think the symbolic importance kind of outweighs the practical importance, at least for this year.
Yeah, and I would add that like 2 big wins are much better than...
Well, and the Marcus 52-point game is in addition to the history of the program.
Yeah.
The game that Marcus had, I mean, we're just talking about adding things into the Marquette history books, and the fact that any history is occurring right now is a good thing for the program.
Yeah, I also think part of it's being in the Milwaukee media market. I mean, when you go to a big state school, they're the only game in town, so you always have people that are going to be engaged. Here, if people don't like what you're selling, they could just go watch the Bucks. They can go watch the Brewers. They have a million different sports and entertainment options to choose from. You have to be actively
Badgers
good.
Are a huge deal as well, right?
For some reason, I don't know why.
Especially at coaches.
Big Ten Network is just a great channel, full of great sports.
So I think
do you enjoy 55 to 50 basketball?
Virginia and Duke's on.
Oh, sweet.
So I think for me it comes down to winning tournament games. I think beating Villanova at home, even if they're a number 1 seed, 2 years in a row, that's great. if you don't win in the tournament, none of this means anything. You need to advance. You can't get embarrassed by South Carolina like we did. They were on a good...
I disagree.
I think that's fine.
Yeah, I think their goal right now is to make the tournament as a program.
Yeah,
that's it.
I think make the tournament is fair for this year. Honestly, next year, their goal should be at the very least round of 32, if not Sweet 16.
If your goal is to just get into the tournament, that's not acceptable.
But with
this particular team,
goals though.
Yeah. No.
I mean, for
if your long-term goal is just get into the tournament, fine.
I'm sure that players and coaches don't say that their goal is to make the Final Four and win the national title. I'm just saying, as a fan base, we just need to get in.
And a pro.
Yeah, we just got to get in. I'm happy if we get in.
But I don't think
the athletic department.
I want to have fun on Selection Sunday.
I want to make a run in the Big East tournament.
Jesus, one at a time.
Wow. But they're so Wojo is in his fourth year?
Yeah.
So that is a starting point. You know, there's a progression there with a first-time head coach to manage your expectations. You know, he's never done this before, and he's getting all his new players in, establishing his system and his assistant coaches and building the program. So I think you have to have realistic expectations. And I think that the program probably has those for where they're at right now. Obviously, we've seen a major talent influx, I think, with this freshman class.
Yep.
And next year as well. And I think that only is going to increase those expectations now as we go along.
I'm all for realistic expectations, but if we can hope to beat Villanova, if we can beat Seton Hall, if we can beat some of these teams, if we can, anyway, I think it is a realistic expectation to want to win in the tournament. Getting in, it's not enough for me.
Yeah.
So anyway, with that, we're running out of time here. Andrew, before we let you go, I want to ask you, as you look forward towards the rest of the Big East season, towards the rest of this season for Marquette, what is the thing you're looking for in the team that you think is going to be an indicator for success for the rest of this year? What do you think needs to come together for this team just to see us continue to take off?
Well, I think that certain aspects of the defense need to get better. We were talking about this earlier. There's a certain threshold that they're just not going to be able to cross with the personnel they have. They don't have the requisite athleticism to be a top defensive team or anything. But you see these switches on pick and roll sometimes, like against Xavier, where it looks like they've never seen one before. And that's the kind of thing that has to get better. So the mental stuff, essentially. The physical stuff, like if you guard Villanova or Xavier tight and they still beat you, okay, that's a personnel thing, whatever.
They have better players.
Yeah. If if Xavier's beating you because nobody guarded the roller, that's a problem. That's indicative of a deeper issue with the way things are being done. So if they shore that up, if they can just achieve adequacy on defense, the offense should be more than enough to carry them the rest of the way. And I think the difference between where they're at right now and adequacy is shoring up a lot of those mental mistakes.
So you're not saying that Harry Froling is a stable genius?
Hey, he's a good rebounder.
He is a good rebounder.
He is a very solid rebounder. He has a role on this team.
All right, Andrew, you can find him at AndyGold24 on Twitter. You can find all his stuff on MU Wire Sports. Where else are you?
Yeah, so MarquetteWire.org is where we post all of our sports stuff. At MU Wire Sports on Twitter. MU_Wire Sports on Snapchat. We have custom graphics and do a Snapchat preview show. Shout out to Tom Hillmeyer for...
Shouts to Tom.
Yeah, shout out to Tom for for putting in so much work putting all those together. And I also do some occasional sideline reporting for the Big East Digital Network. I'm actually headed down to DePaul not this Sunday, but next Sunday to do a women's game down there. Also, if there are any employers listening, hire me.
And damn it, people, pronounce the last name right.
Yeah. I enjoy money and I can say things into microphones. Boom, there are your two qualifications.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to join us here today on the Real Chili Podcast. It was great having you.
Oh, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Later, peeps.